is to not make the audience uncomfortable. Those were the wise words of Professor Wing, one of our UNC Chapel Hill voice professors, and they were well heeded. That meant hiding stage fright, covering over mistakes and missed entrances, and certainly remembering your lyrics. As a first-year voice major, I often failed to do all three, sometimes at the same time. I missed my entrances, I grimaced at my mistakes, and I certainly forgot lyrics. Sometimes I even attempted to improv new ones on the spot. In a particularly embarrassing moment, I forgot the entire second stanza of a French art song. And I decided to sing the remainder of the piece on the most nasal, unintelligible sound that I could muster. After a few minutes of a very likely offensive French impression, my voice professor had enough. The song ended. So I have sympathy for the two heavenly messengers in the passage that Liz just told for us tonight. I wonder if these two men also had stage fright. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the mother of James, and the other women arrive at Jesus' tomb with spices in hand. And maybe the two messengers just froze up. Maybe they forgot their lines. Do not be afraid. Maybe those were the words they were searching for. It's a shame. They really ruined a classic. Throughout the Gospel of Luke, that's the refrain, that's the song of words of comfort and calm that the messengers from God repeatedly offer. Angels tell Mary and the shepherds not to fear in Luke. This Gospel even retells Jesus offering these words of courage to his disciples. Don't be afraid. But instead, here the two men offer more of a scolding than words of comfort to the women. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Instead of encouraging the women not to be afraid, the messengers tell them to remember. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and rise again on the third day. And the women do remember. They remember Jesus and they lead to tell others. This remembering seems to be a particular emphasis for the Gospel of Luke. In both Mark and Matthew's retelling of the resurrection, the heavenly messengers stick to the script. They tell the women not to be alarmed. They tell the women not to be afraid. But Luke's message is one of remembrance. It's as if the resurrection shouldn't be a surprise if you've been paying attention. Jesus already told you about this. Jesus lived this. Don't you remember? Luke describes both a remembering God and a remembering community. In fact, Luke uses the word for remembering, mnesco, more than any other gospel. The good news of Mary's Magnificat and Zechariah's prophecy in the beginning of Luke is that God remembers. 2 times we're reminded of God's remembering in Luke's opening. Before Jesus' birth, Mary, his mother, proclaims that God has helped Israel in remembrance of God's mercy. And Zechariah proclaims a similar faith before the birth of her son, John the Baptist. God has shown the mercy God promised. God has remembered them. During Jesus' death, during Holy Week itself, the theme of memory is brought especially near in the request of the dying criminal next to Jesus. The man on the cross beside him doesn't ask to be saved. He doesn't ask for the crucifixion to end. He asks Jesus to remember him. And as Luke's story approaches its end in our lection this week, Luke offers paired encouragements to remember again. So what if resurrection for Christians means remembering? Remembering resurrection might mean taking a holistic view of the good news of the empty tomb. It might mean remembering the totality of Jesus' story and our calling to follow the same path, to carry our crosses like Jesus did. Remembering resurrection might mean retelling and claiming the whole story, Jesus' teaching and example, his sacrifice for others, and his triumph over death and the empires of this world. It's all one big story. It's all one big challenge. If resurrection is really about remembering, we can't turn resurrection into a neat little charm solely for our own reassurance. If resurrection is about remembering, we can't limit resurrection so that it's merely proof that we don't have to fear our mortal end. If resurrection is about remembering all of Jesus' story, it isn't so much comfort as the ultimate challenge. Perhaps the stone isn't rolled away to let Jesus out, but to let us in, so that we might die to ourselves, die to our hunger for certainty, die to the lies of self-sufficiency, and trust that God will resurrect us as well. Luke makes it pretty clear in the stories that follow the resurrection account that Jesus won't be bound by human limitations of time, space, matter. We're the ones who needs the stone rolled away, because that's where the cross leads. That's where faithful living leads. If we're paying attention, if we remember, we realize those connections. If we remember, we retell the entire story. If we remember, we're not surprised by how our stories end. The Greek verb for remembering that we read tonight, mneskomai, say that with me, mneskomai, shares a root with another verb, mimiomai, say that with me, mimiomai. But mimiomai doesn't mean just to remember. It means to follow or to imitate. I wonder if the women at the tomb heard those connections. Don't you remember? Aren't you going to imitate? Aren't you following the same path? One of the clearest examples I've seen of this Jesus and resurrection remembering was in the lives of Christians in South Africa during and after apartheid. As one of my final seminary courses, we spent a semester studying the theology of the anti-apartheid struggle, and then spent 2 weeks studying abroad with the theologians, pastors, activists that were there. We heard so many stories of how people had remembered Jesus' resurrection by following his path. But one of the people who stood out most to me was Bishop Temba Ntambo. As both a pastor and a bishop, he knew that the stone was rolled away, not because Jesus really needed the help getting out, but because we have to go in. Bishop Ntambo risked his life repeatedly following Jesus' path of selfless living and faith. He told us stories of helping young people escape South Africa under apartheid. They couldn't get out of the country, so the bishop told them to arrive at the church on Thursday. The police were watching, so the bishop just had the clergy tell the police that they shouldn't worry, they were just having fireworks. They'd hide the young people in the church, and on Sunday they'd drive the youth to the Lesotho border. When they were stopped by the police, the bishop would tell them, "We're late. Choir is leading worship in a church just over there, and we've got to go." You never knew a choir robe could save your life. But equally challenging for the bishop was his appointment to a predominantly white church. He served there with 2 other pastors, both of who happened to be white. When they first started serving communion at the church together, the clergy noticed that the white families would watch to see where the black bishop would go, where he would serve communion, and then they would conveniently go line up via one of the white clergy. And so the clergy of the church allowed the parishioners to self-segregate, and as they followed the path down to the altar, they did. And then, when the white parishioners knelt down at the altar railing, opened up their hands, and prepared to receive the elements, the clergy would switch sides. The white members would look up from the railing and, to their surprise, see a black bishop serving them the body and blood of Christ. I wonder how they could have possibly been surprised. Hadn't they been paying attention? Couldn't they remember the gospel lessons or the hymns or the preaching before? Surely if they could only remember, they would have seen where this path down the aisle to communion, where this path of our lives as Christians leads to discomfort, to change, to death and transformation. Our job is to not be so surprised when the tomb is empty, when God challenges us to give up our lives as well. We do that best when we remember and when we imitate all of Jesus' story, not just the easy parts. So don't be surprised this Easter. Don't be afraid either. Remember, retell,